Okay, guys, I'm back. Got some time to do this, and I wanted to talk about what is truth. We always talking about truth this, truth that, live your own truth, and how that truth, our truth, might affect someone else. So this is the month of Pride. And we have people that's living their truth. And their truth is they were the creator, the person that created them made a mistake. So now they're going to live out their truth. But let's talk about with truth, there also has to be some deception. So as you know, that topic of deception, really resonates with me because of how much deception is in the planet, not just in individuals, worked through individuals, but how much deception is actually in the planet, through our movies and through our television shows and various things, let's talk about television shows. So I was watching uh I was watching an old episode. Matter of fact, it was the first episode of Star Trek. And Captain Pike and his crew, along with Mr. Spock, went down on this planet. And they were literally deceived. They had these images of these people who were supposed to have survived on this planet for the past 12 years. This woman walked up to Captain Pike and was looking at him saying, you're an excellent specimen, and when they turned around, everybody disappeared. The woman took Captain Pike to this mountain that had an entrance where he can go in, and she disappeared. So everybody disappeared. And Captain Pike comes to, and he's laying in this room. He don't know how he got there. He was knocked out. He don't know how he got there. They don't show how he got there. We have an idea how he got there. But the whole thing was about deception. The whole episode, in a sense, was about deception because Captain Pike was deceived. They put him through all this grueling stuff. He was deformed. When they finally got Captain Pike back, he was confined to a wheelchair. He couldn't talk. He had to communicate through signs and things of that sort. And Spock wanted to get him back to that planet, and so he did some things to deceive Captain Kirk. They had a trial. They had all this stuff. And they get him back and then find out that when the original crew, when they saw them take Pike into this entrance, they put their lasers on destroy, and they was blowing up this door that never budged. Like, it didn't open, it didn't crack, it showed no... It showed that it hadn't been touched. But it actually had been touched. It was a gaping hole. So the beings that had taken Pike had deceived them, gave them an image of the door not being damaged when the door actually had been damaged. You see in later scenes that the door actually had been damaged. They had caused a big gaping hole in the door. So, I say that because that's what the enemy does. That's what he did before he was kicked out of heaven. That's what he did to Adam and Eve. That's what he did to the children of Israel. That's what he did to people in the biblical time. That's what he does now. Like, the tactics never change. One of the tactics that he uses, he divides people. So how he divide people? by ethnicity, by nationality, and by the color of their skin. And he used the people from the 17th, 18th century, Darwin and Malthus and all of them, to come up with this sort of what is it? The fittest, survival of the fittest. And I'm probably quoting it wrong, but I think you get my point, because many of us have heard it over and over again, what Darwin had said, and he broke things down. He went to Easter Island. He saw one thing on one side of the island, saw something on the other side of the island, and said that there was a difference when it actually wasn't a difference between those animals. And they began to apply it. Malthus came up with the idea of population control, and he started the survival of the fittest. If this many people were allowed to live, then there's not going to be enough food for people to eat. All kind of crazy stuff, And then when they would see darker skinned people, because we're all people, they would see darker skinned people. They would say there's a difference between the darker skinned people and the lighter skinned people. The hair was different. The texture of the hair was different. We're talking about, now mind you, we're talking about people who were kings in their own country, who were kings and queens and warriors in their own country, who had the ability to think. So they would measure the brain of a person from Africa and compare it with a brain from somebody in Europe and say there was a difference in the brain and all this old crazy stuff to bring division. You had, what's her name? Margaret Sanger, who was part of the eugenics program over in Europe that Hitler took it to the extreme, but I'm not going to get into that. But Margaret Sanger believed that certain classes, groups of people were unfit and they needed to be sterilized and not have children and not reproduce. And she went up into Harlem, and the religious leaders at that time bought into the narrative and the Planned Parenthood. She changed her organization from the name that it was before Hitler went cuckoo and started just doing all this crazy stuff under the guise of eugenics. And she changed the name of her program to Planned Parenthood because she didn't want to be associated with that. So we had leaders, religious leaders that was in the quote unquote black neighborhood that was promoting Planned Parenthood and telling the people this is what they need to do and so on and so forth. And the thing about Margaret Sanger was her father was a liberal. He taught her all this liberal crazy stuff. Margaret Sanger was bisexual. She enjoyed having sex with whoever, whenever, however she wanted, and she believed that you should have sex without the consequence of having a baby. How about that? That was her thought. And she would label groups of people feeble and all this stuff because she believed they should be sterilized. Many states had sterilization laws on their books, all because of this craziness. And do your research. You'll find it out, but let's talk about the 5 races that they came up with prior to no races at all. So you had your Negroids, You had the Asians, I think the Mongolians. You had your Caucasian. You had your it was two other groups. I can't think of it right off the bat. But they broke us down into 5 races of people. And I would have a conversation with someone I considered a good friend, and I said I got to thinking about that, and the more I got to thinking, I got to talking to God about it. I said, but who benefits from people being divided? Who benefits from it? Who actually benefits from people being divided because of their skin color? Who benefits from it? Nobody but a devil. Nobody but a devil benefits from people being divided because of their skin color. Outside of the skin color and certain genetics, there is no difference. People are people. If people weren't people, then a lighter skinned person and a darker skinned person, male and female get together, they couldn't have no children. And if something did happen, what are they producing? Because humans produce after their own kind, according to Genesis. The book of Genesis tells us that everything reproduces after its own kind. So humans reproduce after their own kind. Humans reproduce after their own kind. You get it? Humans. Monkeys reproduce after their own kind. Fish reproduce after their own kinds. The walnut tree reproduce after its own kind. The rose reproduce after its own kind. But then you get those ones that begin to manipulate, like in Genesis 6. And you began to get all these different species. They're doing it now. Because Jesus said, as it was in the time of Noah. So they're doing a lot of genetic manipulations. And I know I just strayed away from truth, but I'm going to come back to that because the truth is Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through him. So if he is the epitome, the absolute truth, then a lot of the things that we believe in has to be false and not truth as we know it, because that's one of the sayings. And one of my favorite sites, gotquestions.org, asks the question, what is truth? And it tells you, it goes on to tell you that truth was put on trial and judged by people who were devoted to lies. Truth faced 6 trials in less than 1 full day. 3 were religious and 3 were legal. In the end, few people involved in those events could answer the question, what is truth? So we know that Pontius Pilate's wife had dreams about Jesus and went to her husband and said, don't, you know what? Husband, do not do anything to this man because I've had some horrible dreams. Don't do it to yourself. He did it to himself. The first trial that he had was with Ananias. The truth was led into this reigning high priest's home. And first, they broke the laws of trials against someone. So the first trial, like I said, was led in Ananias' home. And they came up with self accusations against him. He had no one there on his side, and he was supposed to. And then Ananias took him to Cleophas, which was his son in law, house. And there they bore false witnesses against him. The trial was held in secret, which is against the law, their laws, the Jewish law. It was carried out at night. It involved bribery. The defendant had no one present to make a defense for him, and it required 2 to 3 witnesses. It couldn't be met. They used self-incriminating testimony, and they carried out the death penalty against him on the same day. So, and the fact that they themselves didn't have the authority to kill him, that's when they took him to Pontius Pilate. Like, you know what? See, he said he king, and he said that, he higher than Caesar, and you not of Caesar, you don't honor Caesar if you don't kill this man, and so on and so forth. That's what they did to the truth. So if they did that to the truth, which is Jesus Christ, what do you think they would do to us mere humans? And we also know that if the enemy had known what Jesus' real plan was, they wouldn't have the enemy wouldn't have allowed him to be put to death. Because he came to seek and save that which was lost. So what did all of that have to do? All of that deception. All of that deception. There's 5 races of people. Deception. This group of people is better than this group of people. Deception. God made a mistake about what you were supposed to be in the womb. Deception. All of that. It has to do with deception. So now that you know that it has to do with deception, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And let's not talk about our secret societies. Because I'm noticing, those who are supposed to be of the cloth, I'm reading posts about they're in secret societies, fraternities, sororities, Freemason, and whatever else. When you do the research on these organizations, you find out that not only are they secret societies that we're not even supposed to be a part of, but I was just listening to Kevin Ewan last night and finding out that some of the membership at our churches could be considered against God. We swear into these organizations, and we're making these leaders our idol. Deception. We depending on what they're saying to us more than what God is saying to us. All deception. And why so much deception? Well, hell has enlarged itself. It had plans, and they don't want to see its plans negated. When you in a gang, you pledge to that gang. You pledge your loyalty to that gang, to the color, black, white, red, blue, green. When you in Black Lives Matter, those that was in there pledged their allegiance. And the Aryans, they pledged their allegiance. Not to God, not to the creator of heaven and earth, not to the truth, the one that can set you free, but to these idols and this idolatry. And it's running rampant. It is literally running rampant. So I ask again, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to seek out the truth? Or are you just going to believe what they have been saying? Are you going to stay in ignorance, not knowing? Or are you going to walk in the truth? And let me tell you this before I go. So, there are another group of people. The Bible talks about the children of light and the children of darkness. Judas was referred to as the son of the wicked one. Cain was referred to. Same thing. So if Satan got kids, God got kids too. So whose child are you? Who's your daddy? John 8, Jesus was having this dialogue with the religious leaders. And, they called his mama a hoe, because that's exactly what they was referring to you. Your mama wasn't even married, your mama a hoe. And Jesus, well, I know who my daddy is. Who's your daddy? It said, the father of lies is your father. The father of lies, because you don't believe the truth. I'm standing here in front of you. If you don't believe me, believe the works. And what inflamed him in that whole dialogue is when he said, they said Abraham was their father. He said no. And he said, before Abraham was, I am. To me, that was the cherry on the top. To them, they became inflamed, picked up stones and wanted to kill him. Because they like, well, you ain't but this years old. How in the world? They did not realize that the prophets talked about the truth. Everything leading up to his birth, he came the way it was talked about, what the prophets had said. He came that way, the truth. So I'm going to ask you again today, what are you going to do about the truth? You going to do like Pontius Pilate and wash your hands and say, what is truth? Or are you going to do like many have done and sought after the truth? I leave you with that. Y'all have a good day.